Great. I think that's all squared away. Thank you all so much for being here. Is my connection okay? Great. Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and start recording. We'll kind of wait for folks to hop on. We have more folks registered and some folks are already watching on Facebook. But I'm going to start recording and yeah, we'll get started in maybe 2 more minutes. While we're waiting, if folks want to let us know where they're watching from in the chat. I think I have chat ready to go for y'all. For y'all. Oh. Sorry, Ted. Good to see you. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to boot you out. I'll figure out the chat in a minute. Anyways, thanks everyone for being here right now. We have a bunch of folks watching on Facebook right now, and more I'm sure will be joining. So again, thank you all for being here for our 3rd Winter Speaker Series event of this season. My name is Margaret Stern, and I'm the Programs and Communications Director for the Susitna River Coalition based up in Talkeetna, Alaska. It's always fun dealing with all of the Zoom, Facebook complications that go on. It always seems to change, so thanks for being patient here tonight. Our Winter Speaker Series is an event that we hold monthly to educate our community about what's going on in the watershed and the interesting work that others are doing here. And it would not be possible without the Talkeetna Community Council, the Jessica Stevens Community Council, and the Chase Community Council, as well as all of our generous individual donors that make the Susitna River Coalition's work possible. So we're here tonight with Andy Wizik. I think I'm saying your last name correct. Awesome. Good. And Jillian Jablonski from the Tyonek Tribal Conservation District. And they're going to be giving us a chat on the field research they've been doing the past few years in the West Susitna region. So the West Susitna region is, of course, one of the more remote areas of our watershed. But it's currently under threat by the West Susitna Industrial Corridor, which the Susitna River Coalition believes is the greatest threat to our watershed at this time. And what's so interesting about this is not, salmon are very important to us here, and the region in our western watershed has yet to be totally cataloged for anadromous waterways. And so that's what Andy and Jillian have been up to the past few years, cataloging those regions, and they're going to tell us about that tonight. But I will introduce Jillian Jablonski, is the Habitat Programs Director at the Tyonek Tribal Conservation District, and has been working in the field of Alaskan aquatic ecology for over 10 years, with 7 years focused around the Cook Inlet region. She has been with TTCD for nearly 6 years and has led the charge to fill anadromous stream data gaps within the Tribal Conservation District, particularly in areas at high risk of development. Jillian also oversees other TTCD habitat monitoring and restoration program areas, including invasive northern pike suppression, salmon population monitoring, a district-wide stream temperature monitoring project, and she also coordinates the Mat-Su-Alodia Task Force. So a lot of really great work out there. And then Andy Wizik is in his first year as the conservation biologist for the Tyonek Tribal Conservation District, and has been working on salmon and invasive species projects in the Cook Inlet Watershed since 2014. He has served on the Mat-Su Salmon Habitat Partnership Steering Committee and currently serves on the Alaska Invasive Northern Pike Committee and has led salmon enumeration, limnology, and invasive species detection and removal projects for the past 10 years. So again, thanks everyone for being here. You should be able to type questions into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to all of those at the end. But I will go ahead and pass the screen over to Jillian and Andy. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Margaret. We throw a couple Polish names at you and you just bust them right out. It's not always the easiest. All right, can everybody see that first slide? And hear me? Excellent. So, as Margaret said, I'm Andy with Tyonek Tribal Conservation District, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about some of the work we do regarding anadromous fish surveys. So, by documenting anadromous fish in waters where they aren't known to exist, water bodies are then protected by Alaska law in various ways. So I want to discuss a little bit about why describing the true extent of our freshwater salmon habitats is really critical right now, and talk about some of our survey results from 2022 and 2023, and also discuss some of the negative things that have happened in our region when we have disrupted the flow of water or fish in the past. Non-advancing slide there. All right, for those of you that don't know us, we're a 6.6 million acre tribal conservation district located in the ancestral homeland of the upper inlet to Nina, right around the Susitna there, where we're all talking about. So the district is bounded by the Susitna River on the east, the Alaska Range to the north and west, and our southern edge rests just below Calgon Island. So we get all over that region right up to the top of the Alaska Range. And we exist to help in the conservation, enhancement, and wise use of district resources. And we do this through a variety of programs, but I'm here today to really talk about the specific part of the work we do. So if anybody's interested in learning more about our programs or maybe what a tribal conservation district is, please visit our website. I got it up there and I'll have it on the last slide too. So one of the reasons that describing the true extent of salmon habitat in our region is critically important right now is that people are making plans and permitters are making decisions, and they both need really good information to do those well. We've seen developments in Alaska in the past that were well planned out, and others that it could have used more careful thought. And we have a history with roads on the west side of the Cook Inlet that can teach us a lot about the mistakes we should avoid with these types of projects. So when there's a plan to build a road where only a portion of the culverts will be passable to salmon, it raises some concerns, and it should, especially among those who relied on strong salmon returns for generations to support their culture and way of life. But also for those who have seen the expense incurred when roads wash out due to inadequate drainage. So I mentioned the history of roads in this area, which surprises some folks, but there is a small but significant road system around Tyonek and Beluga. And these roads were mostly built for logging and oil exploration. And the culverts they used were definitely not up to current fish passage standards. So one of the most impactful programs TTCD has been able to conduct to date to benefit salmon has been the removal and replacement of many of those culverts. And in places where salmon were only existing below the road, they've now been opened up to anadromous fish. The problem is those fish were there before the road was built. They disappeared before anyone knew the stream was important, and there wasn't really a law to protect the stream because no one ever had the opportunity or luck to find a fish before the road was built. So all the habitat above these culverts was essentially cut off the movement of salmon, like a king toes, which leads to kind of a bigger question. And that's the question of where on the landscape does salmon habitat end? And where on the landscape can you show me that the water quality and connectivity coming from upstream doesn't matter? If we look at this photo above, I think through just education, laws, the general public can look at this photo on the left and know that this lake is important salmon habitat, or this, it's Coal Creek right there is important salmon habitat. But less often do we look over at these habitats on the right and think about the swamps and the creeks that feed these things. And just because we don't see a salmon in a site during the summer or at any given day doesn't necessarily mean that they don't use it other times during the year or need the water that flows from it. So I just want to highlight here that just because a site isn't listed on the AWC, which is great, the AWC is a great thing, doesn't mean it's not important for the survival of salmon. So then I want to come back to the project map. Because it tells a story, right? And it tells a story that I think the majority of Alaskans can understand, people from the area can understand. They can see the Susitna River and Alexander Creek and Upper Sucker Creek, and they're places they've been. And, you know, it has the major features that anyone from the area would recognize. And it generally shows the route of the road they want to build. It's nice and clean and ready to present. So now this is an overlay of the Anadromous Waters catalog and the roads on it as well. And it tells us a little bit more of that story. And so as most of you probably know, or some of you may not, the blue lines on this map represent known Anadromous waters. And the intersections of those lines and the road will presumably be where they will be building culverts designed for fish passage. And remember, for every blue line that's on this map, someone had to go out there. Sorry, I have a toddler in the back that's commenting on my talk as much as anyone. For every blue line that you can see on this map, someone had to go out there and sample fish to prove they were in the water. They had to find 2 anadromous fish of the same species, take some data and photos, and make a report to the state. And once that report was accepted, that system is now treated differently in the eyes of the law. Developers, permitters, they know these laws and they can make their plans accordingly when they submit or approve the plan. And theoretically, salmon are happy, water's protected, and everything's hunky-dory. So it brings me back to this question, and then I ask, how long can the habitats on the left sustain salmon if they're cut off from the ones on the right? And how many of these small swamps and creeks that haven't been able to sample actually do have salmon on top of filtering and feeding water to the streams where we know salmon exist? And maybe they haven't been sampled due to logistics or access. Yeah. Because there's really a lot more water out there than we've seen in both of the previous maps. So this map includes the National Hydrography data set, and it shows us a more complete view of the watersheds, and they're represented by the gray lines here. And I think everybody can see that the density of these lines is quite a bit greater than the AWC protected waters. At the intersection of these gray lines in the planned road, there may be some, but not all plans for or requirements for ensuring fish passage. And so this has the potential to severely impact the movement of salmon, cause a cascade of other downstream water quality and volume effects. So besides simply hoping that developers would voluntarily choose to err on the side of protecting the integrity of their road, salmon and their habitats, the most effective tool that can be used is the documentation of anadromous species and the protection of the law once a stream is in the AWC. But it's difficult and it's expensive to get to these gray lines, and there's a lot of them. You know, those of you that live out in the backcountry there, hopefully some of you are on the call, you have some idea of what it's like to get to some of these places, but it's out there. But that's one of the other things we do, and it's probably even more impactful than we're fixing culverts because we're keeping habitat intact rather than trying to fix problems. And so a little bit about the methods and how we go about going out there and picking spots and sampling. So we start with a map, AWC map, first and foremost. And there's a screenshot of that up on the top left. And the dark blue lines there, those are places that are AWC known waters and protected. And you can see a little line, the stream almost makes an A there and cuts across, and that one's in light blue. And so that stream, an anadromous fish have not been found. So that's a starting point. And then once we looked at those maps, then we analyzed some of the NHD data, some imagery, and try to determine if fish could probably get to this place. Are there beaver dams? Are there other things that might preclude them from getting to that place? And then we make a plan to get ourselves there, which can be one of the most challenging things. If it's on the road system, we use side by side. Oftentimes, especially in this area, we're using helicopters. And depending on the stream conditions, water chemistry, life stages present at the site, we either go electrofish or use minnow traps to try to find fish. And if we do find an anadromous fish, we make those reports, those nominations, like I talked about. We take some measurements of the fish, we photograph the fish, and we make a nomination to the AWC. And after that has been accepted, it gets reviewed annually. The AWC protections are provided for that water body from that point downstream. So one thing I didn't say is when we're looking at these things, we try to pick the topmost point in the stream that's likely to have fish. Once we find that top point, everything downstream is protected and inferred connected because there's AWC fish in there. And so it's kind of like finding a balance between, shooting for the moon and finding as much stream as you can, but also being realistic and knowing that there are waterfalls and there's other things that salmon don't necessarily get past. Oh, and also if we don't find any anadromous fish, we try to determine if there are any downstream blockages or other issues, sampling timing. It might not be might not have been a great day to sample. And so we take notes on that too, and whether or not we want to go back. So this is what that looks like on a map after the season is done. The green and light blue sections are new AWC nominations over the past couple of years from TTCD. And I've zoomed in on a couple areas just to show you a little bit more detail, a little bit so you can kind of picture the locations if you know the area well. But at the end of the day, we've been able to add nearly 40 miles of stream to the AWC in the last couple of years, with a lot of those additions falling within the road corridor. And so that's what the map looks like, the nice clean map, and this is a little more of what it looks like on the ground while the season's happening. I wanted to have something that represented a good middle point between walking on Easy Street and, oh my God, what are we walking through? But this is what accessing and sampling remote streams in this area looks like. We usually have backup sites for our backup sites when we go out because we're taking helicopter time, and it's not something that you want to waste. And many of the streams we choose don't even have places where we can land a helicopter. When we can land, it can be incredibly difficult to even get in the stream or orient yourself to find the stream once you get out of the helicopter because you're walking through alders. And then once you get to the water, it's really difficult to cover ground in the water to make meaningful transect, whether you're electrofishing, whether you're finding pools to try to set minnow traps, especially with overhanging forbs and forest plants in there. So it's my sense that the extreme remoteness of many of these systems probably has more to do with their AWC status, as does the actual presence or absence of an anadromous fish. And I'm saying that's my sense. I have no way of statistically evaluating that without many, many more years, I guess. And being able to somehow compile everyone else's observations as well. So even when we find access points, we may miss fish when they're actually using the site in some way. Many of the sites we visit have been sampled before by other people. One nice thing about the AWC is we can kind of look through some of those records and find out who, when, and where it's been sampled, and if it's kind of due to be sampled again. And we found fish at sites that were previously sampled and found to have no AWC fish. So you can't prejudge these sites. A lot of sites that look great have no fish, and some that look terrible are full of fish. In the slide here, the top left, Jillian's electrofishing a stream we were on, and it had just beautiful mixed cobble and gravel and Key Wood and overhanging riparian area and clear water and nothing. I think we found a sculpin in that creek. And then on the right there in the swamp, you know, the water was warm. There we were adjacent to Pike waters, and you can see how it looks. And it was absolutely chock full of coho. And you can see the coho and the fish viewer there just looking through his cloudy water. And that's where he wanted to be. And now when we got up on this other stream, I think this is a great candidate for going back and visiting a stream. This is a tributary off the Squentna, and we found a large beaver dam that had been blown out in the year before, and likely that had done some scouring or knocked out fish or did whatever, made it really difficult for us to find anything on that particular day. So maybe, you know, that we just haven't found fish on that given day. That's what that means when you don't find fish. But most of the water that I've seen has fish in it. So there's lots more work to do from these gray lines if we're going to keep the waters connected up there and give our fish the best possible beginning and end to their life cycles. Whether or not we find any fish in these gray lines, we'll be out there looking the next couple of years because we know that every drop of water these gray lines represent eventually ends up in a salmon stream. The questions are, if we allow the hose to be kinked upstream, will we lose anything we didn't know was there? And if we find those kinks later on, can or will they be repaired? Keeping these habitats intact is a lot easier than repairing them, and you hear this time and time again when you're speaking to folks from the lower 48, and just the difficulty of trying to put habitat back together. So it'd be great if everyone would take a precautionary approach and anticipate the need for culverts adequate, you know, to work at high flows and able to pass fish regardless of the status of the stream, because, you know, doing so would really protect the development as much as it would protect salmon, and it would ensure that we're not just creating a trade-off where one sector benefits and another one suffers. You know, we have this history, and these pictures on the right are all existing or recently existing culverts, you know, on streams that were not AWC listed and likely would never be listed if the culverts weren't replaced. So it only takes the documentation of 2 anadromous fish to protect a stream. But if we don't find them till after these critical design and permitting decisions have been made, we're once again going to be in the situation of having to fix something broken rather than stewarding something that's whole. And doing so, we'll have spent many more times in money and effort than if we had done it right in the first place. So I want to talk about the streams that aren't in the AWC, because we do go into streams from time to time and don't find anadromous fish, but we find fish and frogs and mammals and healthy ecosystems. And these systems aren't systems anymore when they aren't connected. Most of them are too simple on their own to provide year-round habitat, especially to adult fish, let alone rearing fish. Fish need to be able to move around and access these different types depending on conditions and floods. And I also want to talk about human connectivity here and give a shout out to Jillian and Dasha for taking all these great pictures. I like to present with a lot of pictures, and I'm not very good at taking them on my own. And I just want to give a shout out to Jillian's lamprey down here on the right side, because it's about as charismatic as a panda bear. If you look at that cute little guy, and it's not easy to do with a lamprey. So appreciate it. And yeah, happy little lamprey. Also anadromous fish also helps streams get protected. So another thing that we're finding more and more of is a lot of these little creeks and streams, especially these little first order streams that are feeding in. If they don't have salmon, they likely have juvenile lampreys in them. So that's been neat. So, a special thanks from all the fish nerds at TTCD to all our partners and funders, and Margaret for asking us to come and talk, and Jillian for being a support. I'm sure if you guys have any tough questions for me, Jillian's going to have to answer them. She was very busy diligently writing a grant this week, so I was the volunteer for speaking. I was so glad I got to come. And with that, I don't know exactly how the format will work for questions, but Margaret can probably figure something out. And here's my contact information if anybody has any more detailed questions, or maybe you got salmon in your backyard and it's not in the AWC and you want us to come out and you're gonna barbecue us a big dinner and we'll count fish in your backyard. That'll be perfect.
Thanks so much, Andy. And for those that have questions, you can type them in. There should be a chat and a question and answer box. So feel free to type questions in there. But I have a few for y'all while others are coming up with questions or figuring out. It's always hard to find that question and answer box in there. What is the actual process when you submit a waterway to the Anadromous Water Catalog? What are they looking for, and where are you sending it? Any data or information?
So we're sending that into the AWC office with the state of Alaska. It's accompanied with coordinates. They have a form on if you look up the AWC, they have a form on their site that you can fill out, but you're gonna need the coordinates. You gotta have a picture, and we always take a lot of pictures, as you can see there. See, location, Jillian, who's submitting it? What else am I missing here?
Yeah, so having the picture of the fish, you need definitive proof of the ID. You have to have, like Andy mentioned, two fish of the same species. So like if you get one Chinook and one coho, you better keep surveying. And usually some maps of the area, and I usually submit a copy of our data sheets as well. In the last few years, the AWC nominations have also moved into an online format, super easy. And you can submit the form online, and that all goes through Joe Giefer, a habitat biologist with the state, and he reviews them all, and puts them all on the map essentially after reviewing them. I think it goes through a public process as well, and before being added. So
Awesome.
Most importantly, we're trying to put all these fish back into the water that we're getting them from, and so we have a fish resource permit. And so I wouldn't suggest that you all go out and take a big trap full, or try to throw the toaster in the creek behind the house and see if you can try your hand at homemade electro fishing. But we'd be happy to come check something out if you have something worth checking out. But yeah, keep that in mind that we do have a permit to take these fish and sample them.
Awesome.
Get somebody in trouble.
Yeah. Andy and Jillian told me to go out and
yeah, like, oh
no. Howard is asking if there is a similar effort anywhere else in the valley, maybe the northern Susitna Valley, that y'all know of.
I'm not sure. I do know that there's been some smaller efforts. I know, I think like Chickaloon has made some additions to the AWC. My daughter is running over. She's gonna come join us.
There's staff with the state and some other groups that do it kind of statewide as well, as I understand. I don't know
the Alaska freshwater fish inventory with the state. Yeah, they go all across the state to survey, and not saying they don't do any work in the Matsu, but they got a lot of land to cover.
Broader net. What once you actually find a stream or a waterway and it's been cataloged, what does that then mean for those looking at permitting or pushing a project forward? Does that just have implications for culverts, or are there other things that need to be taken into consideration then?
definitely. So stream bed disturbances, a whole host of things fall under the ADF&G habitat division at that point. And there's all sorts of different permitting. Anything that would be involved in that wetland would now be under the purview of habitat, and pretty good explanations would have to be made if any sort of alterations were being made to the stream bed. And yes, there is more information on that once again at the AWC website as far as specific statutes as Alaska applies them.
And then are there different regulations depending on what kind of species you find, or like lamprey versus salmon, or how does that work?
So lamprey definitely aren't able to access some of the things that salmon are. And if you were able to show, I believe Jillian can correct me on this because she's more up on fish passage, but I believe there are lower velocity barrier requirements for lamprey systems. Is that correct, Jillian?
And what does that mean?
Sorry.
That I'm not sure of, but I can
Okay.
explain what that means. So when you have an undersized culvert, a lot of the water, there's too much water essentially to move through a small pipe. So as the water goes into the culvert, it picks up speed. And it'll pick up speed to the point that fish are not able to move up through that culvert and access habitat, or it might not be a full barrier. Fish may be able to pass, but not as many. But in some way impeding fish passage. And that's why you see a lot of culvert replacements. You see usually like a much larger pipe installed because they're meant to handle those higher flows and 100-year flood levels usually. So, and about the salmon versus lamprey, I'm not entirely sure how if that is handled differently on a permitting level. But yeah, like if there were a velocity barrier, and this is hypothetical because I don't know about the if lamprey have a lower tolerance for velocity. I don't know if you can hear this in the background. But it should be taken into account for permitting if that were the case. It brings up another point of that lamprey distribution in Alaska is really poorly known. So a lot of people do a lot of work with salmon, and there's been some efforts to learn more about lamprey distribution as well. But that's kind of a data gap throughout the whole state at the moment.
Right. We had someone come talk last year about lamprey and the watershed, and that was pretty interesting. And we're interested in learning more about that. Speaking of like the 100-year flood type events, this year was clearly like a very wet summer. How did that affect what you were finding? Do you think it did affect where you were able to look and what you were seeing?
Clearly water's good for the salmon. Jillian might be better to cover this because she was out on surveys the last 2 years. I mean, I was out in the area the last 2 years, but these specific streams, I don't know if that much more was accessible or not.
And I think it's so we definitely had like last fall when we had like the dry start to summer and then it just kept raining and raining and raining. We went out, fall 2022, we went out to survey and streams were blown out all over and there was so much water we couldn't land anywhere. So that was like prohibitive to what we were trying to do, certainly. But I would say for this year, one stream comes to mind, and it's on the West Side Road system. And we surveyed that stream 3 times. And I think the first 2 times it was below a culvert, not listed on the Anadromous Waters catalog. We couldn't electrofish because it's kind of like a mucky bottom and we didn't want to stir it up as we walked through. The first 2 times we caught a total of 1 coho. And then the third time the water level had risen up, not even that much, but a bit. We were like out there and we are like, we're gonna survey today. And we caught something like 15 juvenile coho. So, it really highlights how water level does impact surveying, and it could be sorry, you might not find a fish at the right water level.
So, so if you're going out and surveying and you find one fish one day and then another fish another day, does that count towards your 2? Okay, has to be the
It
same
does.
day. Yeah.
But that one fish certainly keeps you coming back.
Yeah. Are there any spaces where y'all went last year that you were unable to catalog that you're fairly certain there's something in there?
That one I was talking about, I don't know if like next year is the time yet to come back, based on the level of what happened, but at least, yeah, getting somewhere in there. I'm so interested in it. It's just such a beautiful stream. There's just so much complexity. Those little things that you see when your place is. So there was a brown bear that had been walking up and down. It might even been the brown bear that ripped out the beaver dam, but it's like, why is that brown bear walking up and down here if there's no salmon in here, guy? Like, could just be a trail, but yeah, it just makes you want to come back for sure.
Yeah.
And then there's the last nomination we made this year was for about a mile of stream. And it was so weird because I thought it was broken up by beaver dams, but then when we got on the ground, it was clear that it was all connected to each other and everything seemed the same. And we put some traps out, and then we went and did some other stuff because we were involved in doing some other stuff that day. And we came back, and the first trap I checked, nothing. Second trap I checked, nothing. And these are all in relatively close proximity in this area that's connected. The third and fourth traps had 50 coho in them, like total, like between the two. And it was like, and so it's just, if you'd stopped there and thrown those first 2 traps out and left and come back, you'd say, hey, there's no salmon in here. And for whatever reason, it was a better spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to add too that in 2022 we had one TTCD team go out in the field and they were doing an Elodia survey and just threw out some minnow traps during their survey and caught 1 coho. They're like, oh no, just 1. But we were surveying in the same area this year. So we were able to go back and add it to the Anadromous Waters catalog.
Oh,
so
great.
Success.
Cool. Well, that kind of brings up another question in that when you're looking at these places, what other data are you looking to collect, or are you collecting anything else besides just looking for fish? Not just looking for fish, but
so that's like jumping into some of our other programmatic stuff. So we get out, we do stream temperature monitoring, flow monitoring. We're very interested in some of the Chinook streams in our district, and we do a lot of different study and stuff out on those streams. And so we always have an eye out if something's like, hey, we're doing an invasive species survey over here. Let's bring some minnow traps with us. Let's get this other stuff knocked out while we're there, because we do a lot of different stuff and we want to just maximize our travel budget. So there's a lot of that. Like, we're overdoing this thing. Hey, this isn't in the AWC. Let's check it out.
Yeah, when you're going out to do field work, are you going out for a day, or is it like a multi-day situation in the field?
Yes. It's like it just depends. We have a pike project that we've been working on, a multi-year pike project where like pretty much all of June it's like all hands on deck out in the field. And then we do a lot of day trips. Everything's just kind of Anchorage adjacent. So when you're doing helicopter trips and they're taking off from Anchorage anyhow, it's really easy to leave and come back and be back home at night.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. And are y'all looking at doing more surveys in the coming seasons? hoping to?
Yeah, we have funding through this next season, and then we're kind of expanding to survey some of the Chewett River headwaters as well. So we have definitive funding for continued work in the West Sioux for 2024, and then we're going to keep doing it. We're just going to be working in a broader scope throughout our district. So it's pretty exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really exciting to hear about all this work because for those that don't know, the West Susitna Access Road, it's 110 miles, or 100, yeah, 100 plus miles. I won't go right into the perfect mileage count. There are over 180 stream crossings, and less than half of those streams would be designed for fish passage. And so it's pretty wild to hear about all these spaces that y'all are going and actually seeing fish. And, you know, if a project were to move forward, those would then be cut off without a culvert, and those systems would, you know, probably die out. Is that kind of a
Alternatively, and that's a terrible outcome. Alternatively, there is a road built, and it's discovered that there are anadromous fish at all of those sites, and plans drastically change for building the road. And that would be a realistic outcome for probably several of these streams based on what you see. You know, it kind of behooves anybody who's going to be trying to build anything in this area to be thinking about salmon. And as I said before, just because it's something isn't anadromous listed doesn't mean we're not going to find a salmon in there.
right?
Yeah, I think one of the striking takeaways for me is that, you know, like last year or 2022, we surveyed 3 streams in a row that we had to bushwhack into. So it was considerable effort for a considerable part of the day. And they all had juvenile coho. And then we left that site to go survey more. And so many of the other streams in that direct area were just, there was no landing zone. We couldn't get to them without, you know, spending an entire day bushwhacking to a site, which is like, one could do that, but we're trying to get to as many as possible. So it really is striking to me that there's so many of these little tiny creeks that are just full of juvenile coho. It's like we're out there and we're unable to stop because of time and funding at all of the sites. But it's like all of those streams are out there. They all exist. They all have fish, and they're just unlisted. But that doesn't mean that. That doesn't really mean anything, you know? But the default really in a lot of those systems is that they are anadromous. There are impacts like invasive northern pike that would cause a stream to come close to losing anadromy. So that's a real concern for that area. But by and large, there's a lot of fish, anadromous fish out there.
Yeah. It's wild that this is a place that's so close to all our population centers, and so, you know, that's always what kind of blows my mind thinking about this stuff is that there's still very little known about baseline information actually to come to conclusions about some of this stuff, and it's so cool that y'all are out there doing the work to give us, you know, more knowledge of the systems right in our backyard.
Cool. I just want to say, Andy, you did a great job on your presentation. I want to let everybody know here that's watching. You did a good
job. Does anybody else have any more questions right now, or anything that's coming to your minds, Jillian and Andy, that you'd like to make sure that gets covered tonight or that people know?
There's a lot of fish out there. The water is all salmon water. When you look at the gray lines that I put up there, it's just like I said, if there's not a fish in it, there's a fish right downstream from it. And so we got to think about that and how that water moves. And it's water, so it's going to keep going down that hill. You know, we've seen roads over on the Beluga side of things. You know, misplaced culverts, undersized culverts. and it's not any better for the road than it is for the salmon. So that's my parting thought. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, can I ask one more question?
Yes.
What is the cost of a culvert? Well, as we're thinking line cost.
uh, I couldn't come close. Jillian can maybe
Yeah.
give you a range.
I mean, we're talking about like we're currently replacing a culvert that total will be around $4 million.
So,
But I'd say anywhere from like 1 to 4 million.
wow, that's significant.
Cheaper than building it twice.
Yes, definitely. Agreed. Well, awesome. Again, if anybody has any more questions, give it one more minute here. And other than that, while we're kind of just wrapping up, if anybody has any questions about the Tyonek Tribal Conservation District's work, feel free to reach out to Andy and Jillian, or I will send out a email to everybody that registered for the webinar with more information, and maybe a link to the Anadromous water catalog to kind of go through that, because I think there's an atlas that goes with it, correct? Kind of fun to look at. Yeah. And yeah, West Susitna Access Road, West Susitna Industrial Corridor is a massive project that would definitely change our watershed forever, and the salmon habitat there. So it's really exciting to hear about all of your work in the region. Yeah. Great. And with that, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much, Andy and Jillian. And yeah, we will wrap up for the evening.
Great. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Margaret. It was good to see you.
Good to see y'all too. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.